All right. Welcome back, everybody, to my discussions with Matthew Kurbis. This has been such a joy. Hopefully, you learned a lot from our last episode about how do you start a law firm? What entity should you choose? How do you go through that thought process? We left you in a little teaser there with maybe a bigger decision that you might make versus your entity formation might be the name of your law firm. So we'll pick up from there and give our experiences. So for me, I went the super traditional route, which I think always kind of bugs me because the rest of my practice is not traditional. But I really struggled to think of a name at the beginning. So I just used my last name and put law at the end. And I have always wondered, should I change it? Is it really going to be the best marketing approach? Would it have been better to do a cool name like Matthew picked, where it gives a description of the firm itself or the type of practice? I will say the benefit has been I have pivoted. And I know we'll talk about that here in a bit. And so I didn't have to rebrand for every pivot. I just changed my practice services. So that part has been nice, but it is a little bit more of a traditional law firm name. But Matthew, how did you pick your name? And have you had any struggles or changes that you've had to make over the years?
Yeah. So for what it's worth, I have learned the hard way that some folks just want to hire a traditional looking, sounding law firm, right? Like they don't want to hire Subscription Attorney LLC because it does just gives different vibes than person who owns the firm name LLC. Right? So there's like and that's part of my CLE now on the subscription model for legal services is like, "Hey, like, I'm taking the anti-law firm approach, but you don't have to." Like, there's still a hunger for, "I want more accessible pricing for legal services, but I want it to look like it's coming from a traditional law firm." So I don't think that's happening, but there's hunger for that. So having Lester Law, I think there's absolutely, like, nothing wrong with that, and when I made that discovery, I actually got the domain to kerbislegalservice.com. And I even went so far as to like make a logo for it in Canva, like just in case I wanted to launch like a sub brand. And then what happened was I talked to my I talked to my professional liability insurance coverage provider. And I was like, well, like, how would this work if I used a like an assumed business name? And I was going to register it like with the Secretary of State. I was going to totally go by the book with a DBA. Um, and And they were like, "You would need an additional policy." And at that point, I said, "You know what?
You're like,
I'm
people
gonna."
can deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good to have, like, a target market and, like, a target, like, client, a client avatar, and there's other synonyms for that. And, like, my target market are well, I have a target market, and then I have a client avatar. And so, like, my client avatars, they're tech savvy. And look, I know there's, like, a lot of latent legal market and access to justice that, like, I'm not able to help those folks, but I also couldn't charge the low prices I'm charging if folks are not tech savvy. So there's a certain level of and this is why we're never gonna get rid of legal aid and, like, other all that stuff, right? But, like, they need to be a little tech savvy, and so they already kinda need to be in a mindset of, like, maybe traditional law firm isn't for me. And that actually makes marketing my practice and, like, getting clients a heck of a lot easier. So, like, closing that door like, closing doors and windows is actually kind of okay because then there's only one entrance left for people to come through. And that's all related to picking a firm name to figure out your branding. And so when I went with Subscription Attorney LLC, like, it's super broad, right? Like, all it tells people is, this is an attorney you subscribe to. And so there's downsides to that too, right? Even having a trade name that's very generic and broad. I mean, it's not super generic, I guess, because like there's the subscription thing, but I've got some clients and totally still legit, right? Like, and I could help them who they specifically reached out to me because they thought, oh, I want to have a subscription business. I will hire the lawyer
Interesting.
that could help legally with subscriptions. It's like, yeah, I can, but like that's not necessarily like my niche is like just subscription businesses are my client. And I can understand why they think that. And I'm going to let them think that. And that's okay. Because I can, as long as they're in Illinois or they have a nexus with Illinois, like I can still help them. And so I mean, I knew because I'm very much a mission driven firm and like I think subscription's the future, the podcast law subscribed, obviously, like for me, it wasn't that hard. But I've seen some pretty phenomenal trade names come through the podcast for other people who are doing innovative things. And but the point is you got to do what's right for you. And you could always do a DBA. You could always do an assumed business name. Just be prepared that there might be some additional insurance premiums that if you wanna operate 2 names at the same time.
Interesting. I did not know that, but that's good to know. So I'll have to budget for that if I ever want to change the name or do a DBA. Yeah, I've gone back and forth and it's just it's really hard to be specific enough that folks know what you do, but broad enough that you don't get pigeonholed, right? Like I think it is good to have a niche in your specific practice area. For me, I did family law for a long time and then went, "I don't wanna do family law anymore," and so if I would have had, like, Lester's Family Law, then I would have been stuck and, like, I had would have had to change the name. So there are pros and cons to each of it. I think it's something worth giving a little bit more thought to and maybe worrying about a little bit more than, like, what entity do you choose? Looking back, this was a much bigger decision. It all worked out for me in the end, but if it is something you're thinking about opening up your own practice, think about what name you might wanna do. Do you want it to be a little bit more traditional? Is that gonna resonate with your target market? Do you want it to where you give yourself the flexibility to pivot if you need to, but not completely rebrand? Is there something really niche that you're doing and you can come up with a super cool trademarked logo or brand name that everyone's just going to know what you do? Like, that's amazing if that's going to be in your space, but really give some thought to that.
You just said a really important word, trademark, right? Like, we are not IP attorneys. I mean, you're not an IP attorney, I don't think.
No.
Now we know IP attorneys, right? And I've referred clients routinely to IP attorneys, and I bet what they would say is they would say something along the lines of like, "Don't pick a name that someone else has a trademark to." And so lawyers know listening, like no legal advice given, in these episodes, but you should totally do a USPTO search if you're using a trade name, just to make sure you're not infringing anybody's IP. And if you're very serious about it and you want to get that trademark in the beginning, and you're not an IP attorney or trademark attorney, hire a trademark attorney to do the search for you to get to start to register. As far as I understand it, it could take like literally years now. And there's only more government chaos that's going to happen. And that's regardless of your political affiliation. I think very clearly from some of these nominations, like there's just going to be chaos in the future, regardless of where you fall. So, like, who knows how long it's going to take to actually get that trademark? So, this is one of these things you have to maybe think about. Maybe do you really want to get the trademark? You do like I did a USPTO search. Just because you could get the domain to the .com doesn't mean you should, you just could you're not infringing someone else's IP. I have a question for you on the name, and I just realized it when I was talking about the domains, is have you seen more and more law firms using like .law or like something else?
I have not. I still see a lot of .com. I will say one maybe way to have a more traditional name, but not a traditional domain, which is what I have, is my law firm's domain is mylifelawyer.com. And I had toyed in the beginning that I wanted to sort of be folks' lawyer for their life, so I would kind of cover everything from birth to death. So went down that branding pathway for a little bit. So you can always potentially, even if the firm name is something more traditional, maybe with the branding in terms of the domain, do something a little bit different or something that's a little more marketing focused. But I have not seen a lot of the untraditional domain. It's a lot of .coms. I don't know if I've come across .law. I think the market, those are still so new that I would be concerned somebody wouldn't remember. Like they would hear My Life Lawyer and they're just going to type in .com because everything's .com, even if I had, .lawyer or .me or any of the other dots, whatever they're called, whatever they're called. But yeah, I'm sure they're going to become more prevalent because we're just running out of domain names. Do you have one
Yeah.
of those non-traditional ones?
No, 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 I have .com for all of them, but and I do have some domains that, like, redirect to my firm that I thought
Yes,
might be
same.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So but what I've seen is exactly what you said, Lauren. Like, I was at, like, a closing once, and the closer was trying to email the other firm, and they kept putting the firm name .com. It was like name of lawyer law .com, but it was no like, their URL, it was name of lawyer law, not lawyer name law .com. And so none of the emails were going through. And we
Yeah.
were, like, sitting around, like, and we're like, "What the heck is going on?" And, like, and so like, you could run into problems like that. That doesn't mean, like, you have to get a .com, you just have to, like, be it's just an extra thing for you to worry about now. I think My Life Lawyer would be a great trade name for you, Lauren, because
I'll
here's
have
the
to think
thing,
about it.
there's no such thing as life law, right? Like, there's no practice area that, like, if it was, like, My Family Lawyer, different story,
Yep.
right? But, like, life lawyer, it's a good thing we're recording these in advance of publication so you could go do exactly what we were talking about and check the USPTO and see if there's anybody who's claiming that, because that I think that's great. And, maybe I mean, I don't know, like, do we just lean into this now and you see, like, the fact that you pivoted and you didn't have to change your name? Like, I think we should talk about the pivot too because,
Mhm.
like, talk about what you're doing now, and I think Life Lawyer super applies to that.
Yeah, I got very lucky. This was totally fortuitous, so I don't want anyone to think I had some serious forethought here. It just all kind of worked out, which is to say some of these decisions, yes, give more intention to, but at the end of the day, just roll with it and it will be okay. None of these is life-changing or gonna ruin your business if you really give it some intentional thought. But yes, I decided to truly pivot away from contested family cases. I have done my 9 years of service and thank you so much, but I do not want to be in that space anymore. So now I handle death and taxes. So everything that's going to be certain in life and prenups on my other favorite. So I always tell folks that I help protect what matters most now to people. So to be able to plan their estate, get their prenups to protect their assets, or to deal with any tax debt that they may have. Speaking of the IRS, like we did last episode, not paying those and they come knock in to be able to find a solution that lets people sleep easier at night. So, really is still those kind of major life events that all of us, for the most part, right, are going to have to deal with. And so, it really did happen nicely that it worked out, but it was not planned that way. But I do think if it gave me the ability to pivot without having to rebrand, which I think would have probably prolonged the process even more than it took me to actually finally make the decision.
Yeah, and hey, look, I think what my insurance company told me about, like, needing another policy, maybe the guy was just trying to sell me another policy. So, yeah, like, if you truly transition, like, if you're like, "Okay, like, this is gonna be our assumed business name," because that's another thing, and every jurisdiction is different, but at least in Illinois, like, when you pay to have an actual registered assumed business name, just legal information, um, like, you could just totally pivot and just go by that business name now. And there are some industries in particular in Illinois where if you don't put what type of entity you are afterwards, it's actually a violation of that particular act. And so even if they want to use their business name without LLC, without Inc., without whatever next to it, they have to pay the 150 bucks or whatever it is to get that assumed business name to use it without the particular entity designation at the end. And so, like, have helped clients do this before. So, like, if you make I'm just thinking broadly here, not necessarily just you, Lauren, but like any listeners. Like, if you pick a name and you're like, ah, shoot, like, you don't have to go and form a whole new entity. And there might be tax reasons too, and there might be liability reasons too. But you could possibly just do a registered assumed business name and just start going by that name and pivot everything and just let your insurance provider know that you're now going by this name. All current clients have been notified, past clients have been notified, future clients will be notified, and if maybe that way you could avoid having to pay multiple premiums. If ultimately, like, the insurance broker says, "Yes, you'll need multiple premiums if you're going by 2 names simultaneously." I think you gotta do it. I think it's great. I think it's a great trade name. You
I'm
got
gonna look into it
my
now.
votes. Yeah. So at time of publication, who knows? You might look up Lauren and it's My Life Lawyer is the firm. And you might I mean, look, you might want the flexibility to do both, I don't know. I've definitely thought about that. I've thought about in certain situations, I may have missed out on a bigger client because I don't have, like, a traditional sounding law firm name. In fact, like, I know for a fact there are 2 clients that, like, didn't wanna hire me for that reason because they didn't want the opinion that they were getting, like, 'cause all my prices are public, like, an affordable lawyer, like, as their lawyer. And what I told them is I said, "As soon as the other lawyer that I'm talking to sees, like, my firm model," they usually, after we've resolved the dispute, they say, "So recurring revenue." Like, That sounds interesting. Tell me more about that. So there's something to like a traditional looking law firm and maybe having multiple brands. The second law firm I worked for as an attorney had tons of brands. And so there are different ways to approach it, right? Like if you're willing to if it makes financial sense and you could get the right clients, he had a whole separate bankruptcy brand for people being people's bankruptcy attorney versus a traditional sounding like law firm with his name in it to handle other matters. So it's done. It's something that law firms do. So when you pivoted then, because I pivoted too when I started my own practice, what how did you figure it out? And like what was the timeline? Like certainly like you thought about pivoting way before you people who know Lauren, like we're not gonna think that you just like one day you're like, okay, I'm pivoting and the next day like you've done it, right? So
Correct.
walk us through that process, because I think there are some big law attorneys. In fact, I know for a fact there are big law attorneys who wanna leave that life and start their own practice, but they may have to pivot. And so learning, actually, when was the first thought? Then what did you actually do to prepare, and how long did that preparation take? Let's hear it all.
Yeah. So this started for me, I'd probably say in 2020. It may have coincided with the rest of the stressors of the world at the time, but it really started as a quiet whisper of just sort of, I had one case that, oh, every time that email came up, it was like, oh, the dread. I have to deal with this. It's that one opposing counsel. But I would just tell myself, it's just this one case. Like, we're just having a bad day. Once I get through this case, it'll get better. And I just found myself doing that over and over again. It wasn't just the one case. I would get a new case that seemed promising, and it would be another opposing counsel that I've had that same level of dread. So it all kind of came to a head for me in 2021. I had my youngest daughter was just over a year old. She had been diagnosed with RSV and she was hospitalized for a few days. And I had this one particular case with this attorney that was pushing the gray in terms of ethical behavior. But I had this case that had an emergency come up that felt manufactured, but that's beside the point. And I remember sitting in the bathroom, crunched on the I think it was a tub of the hospital room, like, on a call with opposing counsel, thinking to myself, "We shouldn't be having this call. This issue shouldn't even be here. Like, this is all kind of BS. You're just making up stuff because this is how you bill," right? We go through sort of all of that. And I just remember looking at the door going, "What am I doing? Like, my baby is in a hospital crib. I didn't even know those existed with tubes all in her nose and she's feeling really sick and I'm dealing with, this person in this case." So that really was when that whisper becomes kind of a slap in the head of like, "Wake up. This isn't working." And I had a few of those moments. Like you said, I am not one to make a decision one day and then completely change everything, but I needed a few of those I've had moments where I've hung up mediations and literally just the voice went, "I don't want to do this anymore." And I got to the point where I almost left the profession of just, I think this is what it is. This is what being a lawyer is. I guess this isn't for me. Maybe I should just close up. I went for a walk once. I remember thinking, okay, what else could I do? Like, could I go back to project management or maybe I'll do event plan. I mean, those were the thoughts kind of going through my head. And it really was me sort of taking a step back, not doing anything rash, but really thinking about what did I love about the practice that I had? And I made a list. Loved my clients, loved the freedom, made my own schedule, made my own services, did everything on a flat fee. Like I listed all the stuff that was great. And then I listed all the stuff that sucked. And it was opposing counsel and these fake emergencies that would come up and feeling like I had to check my email constantly because I had to jump on something, that needed to be addressed, and just kind of the secondary trauma that family law can really provide to attorneys, that started to really weigh on me. So I just made a list and for about 3 years, from probably 2021 to beginning of this year, I tried different services. Like, okay, well, can I create a service where I'm not dealing with opposing counsel? Can I just work in the background? So I did that for a little bit to kind of get my feet wet in the pivot, I guess, to sort of slowly pivot. But I really just found after a couple of years, it was just like, you know what? I gotta just own up and accept this is not my practice area anymore. And I've loved my clients and I'm so happy I helped them. But for my own mental health and sanity, I need to do something else. And so this year, literally 3 years after sitting in the bathroom of my child's hospital room, I finally kind of cut it off and said, "No more family cases," but it took a long time, and so I understand folks who sit, at a desk thinking, "I hate this job, but I can't just up and quit tomorrow," right? There's a lot of factors. You have family, you have mortgages, you have kids, right? We've got debts that we have to pay. We wanna keep saving for retirement. It's not a easy decision, but the beauty of, I think, running your own firm and having this license and being in this profession is that you can make that pivot. Now, I know you sort of did the pivot and started your own practice. I pivoted within my practice, but what was that decision-making process like for you in terms of, "I don't wanna work for someone else anymore. I wanna do this on my own?"
Oh, man. There's, that was, it yeah, I haven't actually talked about this a lot. Like, I was doing an audit on my speaking that I've done in the last year as we're recording this, we're approaching the end of 2024, and I've had at the end of the year, I will have had 40 speaking engagements,
That's
which
impressive.
it's wild to think about. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some where it's like there's, like, 2 really busy weeks, and then there's, like, 6 weeks of none, and then they all publish at a different schedule, and I list them in the order of publication. And I don't really, like, get deep on this a lot, but there was some serious cognitive dissonance going on because I was getting ready to launch this podcast. I was recording tons of interviews. I was speaking publicly in the ABA about like ending the billable hour for good and like all the bad things about it and all the good things about subscription and like a known price. As I was like learning about the subscription economy more and more and more. And meanwhile, like I had billable hour quotas to meet and I just couldn't. I just like it's like uh, I might have said this and one other thing somewhere, but, like, good luck finding it. I majored in philosophy, right? And I, like, studied philosophy even before college. Socrates is at least quoted as saying, "To know the good is to do the good." And that can kind of be interpreted in multiple ways, obviously, but, like, 2 main ways. And that is just knowing what is right, what is good, is enough. If you know that it's wrong to bully people, then you don't bully people, and that's enough. Another way to interpret that, the way that I interpret that, is to know the good is to do the good means when you know what it means to be good, to do what's right, you must do that thing. When somebody's being bullied, you don't just not bully, you step in and you stop it from happening. And so I couldn't build hours anymore. And the firm was very receptive in light of the pandemic to alternative sources of revenue, but they still wanted me to bill hours, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I've had opportunities come up since having my own practice where it's like, "Oh, join this, like, consortium of solo attorneys, and, like, we do all these things in the background for you," and it's like, "Well, I've kinda got all that stuff automated anyway," but, and they're like, "Oh, and, like, but, like, tracking time is, like, a cultural thing still, even though a lot of these firms are doing alternative fees, like, to join this group, like, you need to, like, track hours," and I'm like, "No, it's just not gonna happen," for all the reasons. Listen to the 100 plus episodes of Love Subscribed and you'll know, or my 40 plus interviews and you'll know, just for 2024. So I just kinda had to. Like, I had to do it. Now from the very first from the very beginning of my practice, even going back to, like, law clerk days, I there was always a little bit of a transactional practice that I was developing those skills, I was building that book, and these people would come to me for anything just because they trusted me, even if I wasn't the expert in whatever legal thing. And they just hated when I had to bill them by the hour. And so, like, I did have some clients. Like, I inadvertently was building a book of business that was primarily transactional based. And I did have some experience with it. But, like, getting ready to launch, I think I thought about it for like 10 months. So maybe that's not long enough. But I remember first thinking about it and then, like, talking about it the next month with my wife, and we were, like, figuring it all out. And part of it was we moved to the suburbs. I had to start going back downtown for court, not even just to be in the office. Like, the people I worked for were phenomenal at the last firm I was with, and they didn't make me come into the office every day, but they were encouraging more office presence. Plus, I had to be in court now again in person. So we were like, she's got a traditional corporate gig. Lawyers have been starting law firms for over, for centuries, really. One of us needed more flexibility for the kiddo. So mine was related to the kiddo too. And What happens if she's sick? Well, somebody has to go pick her up from school. So she's gonna be coming from a faraway suburb, or I'm gonna be coming from downtown. Like, it's gonna take us, like, 2 hours to get there. And we were a one-car family at the time. We have 2 cars now. We lived that one-car family suburban life for 2 years.
Oh, we're in year 9, man. We're still one
Wow.
car family.
Wow. So yeah, it's just like, all of that stuff sort of came together, and I decided it was easier, and when I've said this line before, but it's hard to start a practice within a practice. But really, when I told the main partner who I worked for that I was resigning to go start my own practice to do what I wanted to do, he's the one who said that to me. He said, "I get it. It's hard to start a practice within a practice. You're passionate about this. This is what you wanna go do. I understand."
Wow.
So so, um, so yeah, and it was true. I mean, that's how I felt, but he put it into good words, and he kind of knew, like, it wasn't like, I was clearly my mind was elsewhere, in the last few months of me, like, I'd been thinking about it for half a year at that point, you know? So then I had to do it, and I just like, as I was approaching, like, that last 6 months before launching a practice, like, I signed up for the unlimited CLE plan for the Chicago Bar Association. I was just, gobs and gobs of, of CLEs, like, to get actually, ethically prepared to help clients and, like, take CLEs that were way out of date of how to start a law firm.
Yes, those resources are still very sparse, but certainly being able to switch practice areas, I think I did the same thing of there are CLE resources out there that are substantive focused. So being able to, if you're not liking the litigation aspect, which neither of us, you've got two folks here who are in that space, like that's just not for you. You can find other practice areas and then just, spend a month of nights and weekends learning all the CLEs until you feel comfortable enough. And then I think to your point, Matthew, you made me think of it when you were, even talking about your former boss, having a community around you, a support system, whether that's your partner in life or your colleague who gets it, or even a boss going, I know you're not happy here. I've seen it. Like, go do what you want to do. That is so critical because this life can be very lonely and isolating. And so, being able to build that, it doesn't have to be 50 people, it can be 3 people, but who are going to support you and then being able to find those resources. Getting into tax was not something I have 0 experience in tax. I will say it was my favorite class in law school, so maybe I should have seen the signs a little bit sooner, not 9 years later. But I had fortuitously come across an old law school colleague who was on TikTok, and she's a really great roller skater. And so one of my other good friends was like, "You've gotta check out her TikTok. She roller skates and, like, tells you about tax." And I thought, "There's absolutely no way." And that's what she does. It's brilliant. But it was just so nice, and I went, "Oh, wait a minute. No, yes, she's rollerblading, which is amazing, or roller skating, but what is this tax thing that she's talking about?" So you never know where inspiration can come from, but get yourself a tribe and know that changing directions is absolutely doable, but will take some forethought, and I think some intentionality is likely not gonna be something you're gonna do tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah, and I just wanna call out, what you did is actually a lot harder than what I did, because I burned the boats. Like, psychologically, burning the boats is a hard thing to do, but, like, the pivot is easier because, like, there's kind of, like, no other choice, right? And, like, the choice is, like, do I stay in a traditional law firm model or do I leave? Like, you did what so many people have a hard time doing, and business owners too, and this is an important lesson when making any pivot, is you did not engage eventually in the sunk cost fallacy. I've invested 9 years of family law experience. I have to keep going because I've invested all this time. It's like when people are like, "Well, I've invested so much in pay per click, I have to keep spending," or whatever it is, even in your personal life. I mean, you used to do family law. People probably have the sunk cost fallacy with getting divorced, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, how did you do it? Because, like, that's really hard for people to do, like, psychologically.
Yeah, I think that's probably part of the reason why it took me so long. There was always that little flame of hope of, like, maybe it'll get better, maybe it's just this one case, maybe I can figure out a different way to do it. But I think too, it was like, dang it, I've gotten pretty good at this. And my clients are generally happy. I meet them in a very dark period of their lives, but they're happy with my services. And there was a very real fear of, oh, I've got to start over. Now, I had been doing estate planning and prenups as well as family law the whole time. So why my brain didn't go, why don't you just do those 2 of the 3? I don't know, but I think it was because family law was such a huge it was at least half of my revenue. So
Mhm,
I sort of said, "Okay, I've gotta find something to fill what will now be a gap." And it took a long time to, let that go because part of me did feel like, "Dang it, I've invested so much, I'm pretty good at this." I think what helped me was I had created a DIY guide for people access to basic information about the process here in Colorado, and so I kind of felt, "Well, at least I'll still have that. I can still promote that, I can in a way that will give some folks way, but it's a really hard hurdle to get over because you do feel like, "Man, did I just waste 9 years of my life?" And looking back on it now, I see that that's absolutely not the case, but when you're on the flip side of it, it can be really hard to put that aside.
I also made a note that I really liked tax law too in law school.
You might, be a new service, Matthew. We might
I
be
mean,
generating some ideas.
to me, it's just like, who likes tax law? Like, I was like, "What's wrong with me? Like, why do I like this so much?" I
Oh,
think it
I
just says
loved it.
something about it's like about the person though, like, there is, like, a type of person that, like, kind of likes tax law. I've always now this makes sense, Lauren. I've always gotten along with people who liked tax law in law school.
That should be your litmus test now when you meet someone new, like, "Do you like this?"
Or like, I'm getting a feeling like, "Hey, we're getting along. Hey, do you like tax law?"
You never know, that might be the key.
Yeah, yeah, well, alright, so how are we wrapping this up again? Next time on,
Until next time, I don't remember what we said. You can
um
pivot. You can do it. I think that's the lesson of our of our episode here is it's absolutely doable no matter how you're coming at it, but it's just something you want to do with real intentionality because it is not a light decision, but it is doable.
Yeah, and while this is a series on how to run a law firm in 2025, it's not like a startup podcast. There are some great examples in the startup world of startups that we all know and love that weren't doing the original thing that ended up making them successful. They pivoted their business. And so it's definitely a thing in startup land. And there's tons of other podcasts that you could listen to and stories you could read about where like a company pivoted from one type of thing to a different type of thing. And that's what made the difference. And so whether we're pivoting our names that we choose for our firm, or pivoting our practice areas or something else, that's the takeaway here is it's okay and it might be significantly better. Okay, I think that's pretty good. I think that's good?
Perfect.